You know, I was sitting here today and I'm looking out at y'all and I was thinking, you guys look like I feel right now. You really do. But I want to encourage you as we start out this morning that with a small, simple number, 3 weeks from today, you're going to be sitting, probably waking up, let's see, it's 9:09. You'll probably be waking up about an hour from now to the smell of your mothers, your grandmothers, your aunts, whoever's house you always go to for Thanksgiving. You're going to be smelling turkey coming up the stairs. 3 weeks. You can smile about that, right? Well, I hear that there's a small wager on what passage I'm going to preach out of. Those of you who know me know I'm an Old Testament guy. I love the Old Testament. I love the stories of the Old Testament. So let's put that to rest right now. Let's turn in our Bibles to 1 Kings this morning. And the passage we're going to look at this morning, we're in a dark time in Israel's history. The kingdom is divided. Let's turn to 1 Kings chapter 16 to begin with. Our passage this morning is going to be in 18, but to help understand where we're at in Israel's history, let's begin reading in 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 28. So Omri slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria, and Ahab his son reigned in his stead. And in the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, began Ahab the son of Omri to reign over Israel. And Ahab the son of Omri reigned 22 years. And Ahab son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord, and all that were before him. And it came to pass, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took to wife Jezebel, the daughter of Israel, king of Zidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. And he reared up an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he had built in Samaria. And Ahab made a grove, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel that were before him. Skip down to chapter 17, verse 1. And Elijah the Tishbite, who was of the inhabitants of Gilead, said to Ahab, as the Lord God of Israel liveth, before whom I stand, there will not be dew or rain these years according to my word. That's the background that we find ourselves in as we go to our text this morning in 1 Kings 18. Let's look at 1 Kings 18, and it says, And it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year. That's the 3rd year of the drought. They've been 3 years without rain. And he said to Elijah, Go show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. And Elijah went to shew himself to Ahab, and there was a sore famine in Samaria. And Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of his house. Now, the author of Kings is going to give us a little insight on who this Obadiah character is. And it says, Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, for it was so, when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, that Obadiah took 100 prophets, and hid them by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. Verse 5, we return to our story. And Ahab said unto Obadiah, Go into the land, unto all the fountains of water, unto all the brooks. Peradventure we may find grass to save the horses and mules alive, that we may not lose all of the beasts. So they divided the land between them to pass throughout it. Ahab went one way by himself, Obadiah went another way by himself. And as Obadiah was in the way, behold, Elijah met him. And he knew him, and fell on his face, and said, Art thou that my lord Elijah? And he answered him, I am. Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, What have I sinned, that thou wouldst deliver thy servant unto the hand of Ahab to slay me? As the Lord thy God liveth, there is no nation or kingdom whither my Lord hath not sent to seek thee. And when they said, He is not here, he took an oath of the kingdom and nation that they found thee not. And now thou sayest, Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And it shall come to pass, as soon as I am gone from thee, that the Spirit of the Lord shall carry thee whither I know not. And so when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find thee, he will slay me. But I, thy servant, fear the Lord from my youth. Was it not told my Lord what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord, how I hid 100 of men of the Lord of the prophets by 50 in a cave and fed them with bread and water? And now thou sayest, Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he will slay me. And Elijah said, As the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, surely I will show myself unto him today. And Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. What would have you done in this passage if you were Obadiah? Just think about that for a second. I want to take you to another time period, one that maybe we're more familiar with. The year is 1943, June 16th. I'm going to give you a preview of what we're going to be talking about on Tuesday, Veterans Day. Just think about this for a second. When Captain J. Zemer, a member of the 43rd Bomber Group, lifted his B-17 off the runway at Port Moresby, New Guinea, he knew, as every member of his crew, that this was a vitally important mission. The lone, unescorted bomber, that never happens in a war. They never send bombers out alone. It's a sitting duck. The lone escorted bomber headed for Buka, a small island just north of Bougainville, some 600 miles to the northeast of New Guinea. Their mission, they were to photograph Japanese installations, then map the west coast of Bougainville as far south as the Empress Augusta Bay in preparation for Allied landings. Many of you know what landing that is, Guadalcanal. This might possibly be the only clear day that they're going to have before that October-November landing. It was now or perhaps never. In the nose of this B-17, there's a young lieutenant, Lieutenant Sarnosky. For those of you that don't know about a B-17, many of you I'm sure don't, I'm kind of an airplane buff. I've sat in the nose of a B-17 before. Sitting in the nose of a B-17 is like strapping yourself at the edge of a cliff and then that cliff flying 290 miles an hour. Because the nose of the B-17 is glass. It's completely glass. The nose gunner sits at the edge where the metal ends and the glass begins. So he's sitting there, his entire peripheral vision is air. That B-17 flies 290 miles an hour with 5,000 bombs in it. They had no bombs. They were flying faster than that. Their objective was not bombing. Their objective was intelligence that day. The photo recon part of this mission went off without incident, although there was 22 enemy fighters seen taking off from an island nearby. A few minutes later, Zemer started the mapping run along Bogan's west coast. He started the second part of his mission. 45 seconds from completion of the run, his B-17 was attacked, head-on by 5 Japanese fighters. They came out of the sun. They're flying right toward Lieutenant Sarnosky. All he's seeing is 5 fighter jets coming right towards him. In the 45 seconds to the completion of this run, Sarnosky takes out 2 of them, though he's mortally wounded. Captain Zemer takes out 1 with a nose gun as the pilot. That very seldom happens that a pilot can actually shoot down the other fighter. The two remaining fighters circle back around. They're coming back. Just then, a 20-millimeter shell explodes in the cabin. 20-millimeter shell is about a third of a stick of dynamite when it explodes. It's bigger than your thumb. It's about the size of a $half in diameter. It's about the length of your hand in size. 20-millimeter shell comes into the cabin, explodes, knocking Lieutenant Sarnosky onto the catwalk underneath the pilot. Lieutenant Sarnosky understands this mapping run has to happen. He crawls back up to the guns and continues fighting until the 2 remaining Japanese fighter jets disperse and go their way. Lieutenant Sarnosky drapes over the machine gun and dies that day. Now, if we brought Lieutenant Sarnosky up here today I think that we could all say that he understands what risky obedience is. I'm not talking about the 20 things that Lieutenant Sarnowski did that day that was required of him before he climbed in that aircraft. You know, he polished his shoes. He checked the gun on that aircraft. He made sure that his uniform was in order. He made sure that all the paperwork was filled out. I'm not talking about all of those things that were obedience and they were required by the United States Army in 1943. I'm talking about the obedience that completed the mission that he was called to. The obedience that cost him something. None of us would deny that he understands what risky obedience is. I think in our passage today, Obadiah understands what risky obedience is also. You know, many times we look at obedience to God as something we can stack up. You know, I've polished my shoes. I've filled out my paperwork. I've checked the gun on the front of the B-17. And now, God, you're asking me to do something that's going to cost me something. I'll check out of this one, God. Let me just set this one out. When you get back to the things that's not going to cost me something, when we get back to the dorm and have to polish the boots, I'll be ready for that. He wants to check out. Obadiah wants to check out here, doesn't he? I think that amid life's trials, obedience to God is expected and rewarded. Notice that there's two responses in this passage of God concerning the obedience to Him. The first response God has is that God expects obedience. He expects it. You know, sometimes we look at God and we think that He's up there in heaven saying, you know, Tony Abell's down there today and, you know, I've given him the stuff to succeed, but he's not going to do it. He's not like that. The God we serve is not like that. He's equipped you, given you the Spirit, given you the Word. He's given you everything to succeed, and He expects you to obey. He expects the obedience out of you. Notice with me, there's 4 characteristics of this obedience that God expects. The first characteristic is simply this. Godly obedience is an infiltration, not a total seclusion from those who need to hear His message. That's important. Let me say that again. Godly obedience is an infiltration, not a total seclusion from those who need to hear His message. Notice in this passage that we find ourselves today, Obadiah is the second in command of the kingdom of Israel. Verse 3 tells us, Ahab called Obadiah, which was the governor of his house. Obadiah is over everything underneath King Ahab. He's over the palace, he's over the people, he's over all the animals. That's the purpose of them hunting down and trying to find water for these animals. Notice that also Obadiah limits his civil disobedience that we find in this passage to what applies to God. These 2 points are important for this reason. Many times in our life as a believer, we decide, you know what, the right person's not in power. He's not God-friendly. He's not Christian-friendly. So I'm just going to take my ball and go home. I'm going to sit in my little dome where everybody loves me, everybody adores me, everybody thinks I'm great. And I'm just going to go home and sit there and wait for the next guy to show up. Maybe he'll be more God-friendly, more Christian-friendly. How many times do we do that? That's not what we're called to do. We're called to infiltrate our society, go and be a light in the darkness. We're to limit our civil disobedience to what applies. Participate where we can. That's the point here. Obadiah has not taken his ball and went home. He's participating in society and being a change agent where he can be a change agent. Notice with me also that the second characteristic of the obedience God expects is that godly obedience has no regard for human logic, only His eternal plan. You know, when you look at this story here, Obadiah is in a fix. He really is. We've already stated he's the second in command of this kingdom. And Ahab has done due diligence to find Elijah. He's hunted in every nation around. He's tried to find him. He's made people swear oaths. It's kind of like with your little brother. I was a little brother, so this happened to me. But where you get your little brother down and you rustle him down and you're like, "Where's my toy? I don't know. Where's my toy? I don't know. Say it." And he's like, that's basically what Ahab's done. He's wrestled all these kings down and said, "Okay, you really don't know. After I've pressed you and pushed you, okay, you really don't know. Okay. Move on to the next kingdom. Now let's put pressure on this guy. Where's Elijah? He's done due diligence. Now Obadiah, the second in command, meets Elijah in the way. What's Elijah say? "Go tell Ahab where I'm at." There's some risk to that. He's done due diligence trying to find Elijah. Now all of a sudden his second in command knows where he's at. Suspicious? Probably. You don't think that possibly Ahab had suspicions about Obadiah, that all of a sudden these 100 prophets are being hid in a cave? People's whispering in his ear, "Hey, he really hid those prophets over there. You need to check that out." "No, not Obadiah. He's my strongest ally." "Not Obadiah. He wouldn't do that," Ahab's saying. It doesn't make sense. Notice also that the message given to God's messenger was inflammatory. How many of you know what your name means? Okay. My name means priceless. Don't laugh. My parents probably thought I was priceless till I was about 2. But my name means priceless. Well, in our Bible story here today, in 1 Kings 18, and throughout ancient Near Eastern history, names meant something. They carry meaning. And in this story, Obadiah's name means servant of Yahweh. On the other hand, more importantly, Elijah's name means Yahweh is my God. Now notice in our passage here today, if you look at our passage here, in verse 8 it says, "And he answered him, I am." This is Elijah speaking. "And he answered him, I am. Go tell thy Lord, behold Elijah." And you notice the next 2 words are in italics. That means they're not in the passage. Think about what he's telling Obadiah to tell Ahab. Elijah is telling Obadiah, you walk into the darkest kingdom in the land, the darkest point in Israel's history, and you tell Ahab, "Behold, Yahweh is my God." No more hiding those prophets in secret. No more doing the covert stuff. Now it's time to step out and obey in a manner that might cost you something. Stand in that court and say, "Behold, Yahweh is my God." That's what he's asking Obadiah to do. The message that he was carrying was inflammatory. The message we have today that we're carrying into the world is inflammatory. No one wants to hear it. No one wants to hear that if you die today in your sins, you will burn eternally. The people down at the pier at Clearwater, they don't want to hear that. The people in the nursing home and their parents, they don't want to hear that. The kids in Joy Club and their parents, they don't want to hear that. That message does not ring well with them. They want to be a good person, do what's right, and eventually make it. They don't want to hear that if they do not come through Jesus Christ, they will die. From a Christian perspective, when we're dealing with Christians, sometimes the message we have to deliver to other believers is inflammatory. They don't want to hear it. When we try to deal with relationships properly, sometimes they don't want to hear it. That message is inflammatory. It takes them out of their comfort zone. They don't want confrontation. We want to huddle in our offices, in our dorm rooms, in our cars, in our homes, and not deal with problems. Because sometimes the message we have to carry is inflammatory. That's where we find Obadiah this morning. Notice that Obadiah is focusing on God's priorities, not man's priorities. Notice with me the third characteristic of the obedience that God expects is that godly obedience is a choice, not a happenstance. Obadiah in verse 4, he made a choice to obey God, not civil authorities. Obadiah continually fed the prophets. The language there sets up a syntactical design that tells us that he continually fed the prophets. This was an ongoing thing. He didn't hide them in 50s in a cave, throw them a loaf of bread and a gallon of water and say, hope you make it. He continually took care of these prophets over time. Obedience is a choice. He made a choice. He prepared for that day. He did things throughout his life that helped prepare him for that time when God tapped him on the shoulder and said, it's time to step it up a notch. This might cost you something. Are you ready? He could boldly say, I'm ready. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. You know, Airman Sarnosky, if he had not prepared that day, he would have not succeeded in that mission. He trained and trained and trained and trained. That pilot trained over and over and over again for what took place on that fateful day in June 1943. Your obedience has to be a choice, not a happenstance. You have to prepare. You can't wait for that time when God says, okay, this might cost you something. You need to do it. And you haven't done anything to prepare yourself. You're not in the Word. You're not walking with your Lord. You're not working through issues and trying to walk in a right relationship with God. The fourth characteristic goes hand in hand with this third one, and that is that godly obedience is a lifestyle, not an event. We notice in verse 3 that Obadiah was known as one who feared God. He had a lifestyle that prepared him for obedience. He wasn't a person that worked from major event to major event to major event and decided whether he was going to obey or not obey. When an opportunity to obey or not obey was presented to him, it was not a choice. He knew what the right thing to do was, and he knew he needed to go forward. He did not work his way from event to event. His life was not event-driven. Many times we wait till we're in a situation till we decide whether we're going to obey. Failure happens in those situations. Make it a lifestyle. Make your obedience a lifestyle to God. Like I said before, Obadiah continually fed these prophets. It was a lifestyle for him. You know, in preparation, a lifestyle will emerge. As you continually obey and walk to the first point where God asks you to do something and you obey. You walk to the second one, God asks you to obey. You do it. You do it the third time. You do it the fourth time. Throughout that, your faith is increased in God. Your confidence is increased in God that He's going to take care of you. Eventually, you're going to look at it and say, this is a lifestyle for me. I have no other choice but to do what God asked me to do. Paul kind of states it this way in Philippians 2:4. Therefore, my friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. You know, ironically, men are not expecting you to obey. Those people sitting in your dorm room, those friends of yours that are on campus, they don't necessarily want you to obey. It makes them look bad. If they're living in disobedience and you start a life change of obedience, what's that make them look like? A hypocrite. Men do not want you to obey. I don't know what you're dealing with here this morning. I have no idea. And I don't know what risky obedience looks like to you this morning. It looks different to me than it looks to you. I'm in a different place in my life than you are. But risky obedience may look like this to you. It may look like a situation where you're in a relationship with a guy, and that guy is not a spiritual leader, and you know it. And you're progressing down this road, and your parents like him, and your teachers like him, and all your friends like him, and they're all friends with him. But you know when you lay your head down, ladies, at night, you know that man will not lead me towards God. And you know you have to do something about it. But you know it's going to cost you something. It might cost you your friends. You may have to explain it to your parents that think this guy's great. You may have to explain it to all these people. You're not ready to do that. You don't think you can do that. It may cost you something. Guys, for you, it may be that you're in a relationship with a girl and you really like her and your mom really likes her and all your buddies like her, but you know that God has truly called you into ministry. And you know that that lady will not be a partner in ministry with you. She is going to drive you from ministry. You know that. Risky obedience may be for you that relationship has to end. I don't know. Risky obedience to you may be that you have cheated on tests. You have decided that to take the easy way. You've not filled out paperwork properly in this school, and you're lying and you're cheating. And you know that what you're doing is wrong. And you know that you got to talk to someone, but you know that obedience is going to cost you. You know that you don't see the end of it. You don't understand how it's going to work out. Neither did Obadiah here. Notice Elijah told him 2 sentences. Go tell thy Lord, behold Elijah. I promise I'll be here. He didn't give him the complete story of where he was at for the past 3 years and how he's evaded the king and how can I know for sure that you're going to be here. He didn't see the end result. He didn't understand how it was all going to work out. Risky obedience for us, we don't always understand how it's going to work out. We don't know. That's not what's required. What's required is the obedience. For some of us in the staff and faculty, maybe it's a relationship that we need to mend. We need to do what's right and go to a person and fix what's wrong. I don't know. I mean, that's at every level at this campus. Whatever your risky obedience is, I pray that you take care of it today. Notice also that when we take the risk and we step out on faith, how does God respond? We know his response is he expects obedience, but how does he respond when we obey? Notice the second response of God is that he rewards obedience. There are 2 aspects of this reward. Notice with me first that God's rewards demonstrate he always keeps his promises. God is trustworthy. He always keeps his promises. God faithfully sustained Obadiah through his trials, both the hiding of the prophets and going to Ahab and telling him the truth. God will faithfully sustain us through our trials. Psalm 25:10 puts it this way, all the ways of the Lord are loving and faithful for those who keep the demands of his covenant. Hebrews 10:23 puts it this way, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who is promised is faithful. 1 Peter 4:19 says it this way, so then, those who suffer according to God's will should commit themselves to their faithful Creator and continue to do good. God demonstrates he always keeps his promises. But you may be saying, you know what? I got to go to the administration and I'm probably going to get kicked out. How does that prove God's rewards faithfulness? How does that prove anything? I'm going home. I got to explain to my parents what's going on. I'm going home. I got to explain to my parents why I broke up with my boyfriend. I'm going home. I've got to explain to my parents why I don't have a good relationship with this teacher. I'm going home to my wife and got to explain why this has happened in my life in the administration. Well, God's rewards may be immediate or future. Let me take you back to Airman Sarnosky. He died that day on June 16, 1943, slumped over the nose machine gun. He never saw the reward for what was to take place after he died. He never saw it. His mom gratefully accepted the Congressional Medal of Honor on his behalf. His brothers and sisters were there when he was buried in Arlington. He never saw the rewards of what he did that day. We may never see the rewards on this earth of our obedience. It may happen long after we're gone. Our obedience may be rewarded here, as in Obadiah's case. It may be rewarded in heaven. We don't know. That's not part of the equation of if we obey or not, or whether we should obey or not. Obadiah, on the other hand, he was rewarded immediately. Obadiah is standing there for the rest of his life saying, you know what? You remember what happened on Mount Carmel? You remember that? 450 prophets of Baal, Elijah, fire, all that? I was part of that. I was the guy that connected those two people together. I was the guy that went and got Ahab, told him where Elijah was. They came together, giant confrontation. We find out in the next chapter, Israel's heart turned back towards God because of that event. One man chose to obey, even though it was going to cost him something, and he was rewarded for it. God expects obedience. He rewards obedience. What are you going to do today? Father, we come to you today thanking and praising you for your faithfulness, your trustworthiness, all of your attributes, your grace, your mercy that you've even decided to communicate with us. We thank you for that. Lord, today help us to obey you, even when it's going to cost us something, even when we know that it's going to cost us something. In your name we pray. Amen.